Good afternoon. I'm Sarit Zehavi, Alma CEO and founder, and I'm very proud and honored to present our panel of today, which me and Zvika just summarized a new title to, The Aerial Threat to Israel. For those who are not familiar with what we do in Alma, Alma is an independent and non-partisan research and education center that focuses on Israel's security challenges on the northern borders. Yet, in the past 2 weeks, we were very busy in fighting ignorance concerning what is happening in Gaza. And actually, we see this as our personal mission to provide research and analysis and information of the geopolitical and security reality and the development here with what Israel is facing on its borders. Since we are in the north, we are usually focusing on the north, Syria, Lebanon, the effect of our security, the Hezbollah, and of course the Iranian proxy and the Iranian involvement in these regions. Today, we're gonna deal in a topic that is relevant for both fronts, the southern one and the northern one, and of course, very relevant to what was happening here in the past few weeks. And for this cause, we are honored to host with us today Brigadier General Zvika Haimovich, who is the former Israel Air Defense Forces commander over 3 decades of experience in aerospace and defense arena. Zvika has a lot of operational experience in high intensity conflicts, professional experience in operating new systems and technologies such as Iron Dome, Arrow 3, David Sling, anti-drone concept, and more. And of course, we're going to discuss all of that today. General Haimovich also holds BA in Middle Eastern Studies from Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and master degree in National Security Studies of Haifa University, as well as a diploma in strategic management from the USAF Air War College in the United States. So Zvika, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Sarit.
During the current operation, the Guardian of the Walls, 4,300 rockets were fired to Israel from Gaza. About 640 fell in Gaza out of the 4,300. Iron Dome had success of interception of about 90% of the rockets that were aimed into populated areas. All the rest actually fell in open areas in Israel. All in all, about 170 homes were destroyed or damaged. About 13 people were killed, civilians were killed. And all of that in a round of escalation, the 4th round of escalation actually in the past a little bit more than a decade, that lasted 10 days. This time we have seen various rockets, various explosives, a little bit different from in the past, probably heavier, to different ranges. Rockets were fired to Jerusalem, salvos of rockets were fired to Tel Aviv, and Iron Dome successfully intercepted them. This is the 4th operation now in Gaza, and the Iron Dome presented very, very impressive capabilities. Zvika, I would like to discuss a little bit, it's been more than 15 years since Israel had withdrawn from Gaza. What can we tell, and this is the 4th operation since then, what can we tell about this operation with regard to this aerial threat, to the missile threat, rocket threat, UAVs, how this one is different from the other 3 that we experienced here?
It is a great question to open our session, but before that, I would like to raise 2 takeaways, and then I'll go straight forward to the question. First of all, I'm not here to tell you stories. I'm here to help you and support you to understand the reality. So it's all about understanding the reality, not telling stories. The second takeaway, we cannot watch or understand our reality, the complexity and so complicated situation in a stills photos. We need to look at that as a video. It means the dynamic environment, the dynamic situation. The only way to understand the situation, the complicated situation, it's looking at the reference, the links between events, and then understand the full picture. And back to your question, Sarit, I think it's not just about names and days and titles and campaigns. And the idea is to see in less than a decade what's happened in the Hamas, and it will be a great projector try to assess and analyze what's happened in the northern front. Talking about the Hamas and the other jihad and Islamic groups in Gaza, because there are much more than the Hamas, but there is no question that the Hamas, they are the majority, the main group that we are dealing with. So you mentioned the pillar of defense and protective edge and the last campaign. You can see the differences between the days, 7 days, 51 days, 11 days. We can see the differences between the amount of the targets that these bad guys launch to the state of Israel. But I think that's the main idea that we can see from campaign to campaign, from year to year, is the fact that Hamas become kind of a semi-military organization. They are not just a terror and guerrilla group. They behave, they are working, they are acting like a semi-military. The way that they are using the armed forces, the method that they are launching to the state of Israel, it's not a pirate, spontaneous launcher. It's a very practical method, a very sense way how to create or try to create and damage the state of Israel. And for example, I'll give you a few things or a few key points about the last campaign just a few days ago. 75% of the Israeli population under daily attack. So you mentioned the 4,300 rockets in 10 days, just to compare it to protective edge. Almost the same number, 4,700 in 51 days. So in 20% of the time, the same amount of threats. What does it mean? It means that the capability, the skills of the Hamas grew dramatically during the last 5, 6, 7 years. This is the meaning of the numbers behind the campaign, behind the reality.
So actually, it's not only number, it's not only capabilities, but also a change in perception in the way Hamas is perceived itself.
You are more than correct, and I will mention maybe 2 or 3 ideas behind that. First of all, they are using a method that's I called a mass fire. What does it mean, a mass fire? Focus on place and time. We saw it in the second day in Ashkelon. In less than an hour, 200 short-range rockets to the city of Ashkelon. It's very close to Gaza Strip. It's around 7 miles from the north part of Gaza to the city of Ashkelon. But in less than an hour, 200 short-range rockets. This is the meaning of mass fire. Secondly, is a method of salvo, and we can see very clear the way that the Hamas learning the air defense system and capabilities, mainly the Iron Dome, and they are using more and more the salvo as a key factor to challenge the Iron Dome. For example, if during the pillar of defense, the biggest salvo was around dozen simultaneously rockets, in protective edge, little bit more than 2 dozens, 27, if I'll be more specific. In the last campaign, salvo of 65 simultaneously rockets. This is the meaning. It's not by accident. This is the way that the Hamas and the other guys, I believe that later on we'll talk about the other partners, players in our area, learning and try to challenge the air defense systems.
So, okay, so there is a question here, which, you know, it's very important to understand in light of the fact that Iron Dome presented really impressive answer to all these salvos of tens of rockets. Can you explain a little bit how Iron Dome works? Is it all automatic, or is there a soldier behind any interceptive rocket? You know, what's the cost of all of that? And of course, were we surprised by these salvos of Hamas?
It's a great idea, sorry, to push 5 questions in one question and then give me the podium and the stage to try to catch all of them together. That's very tricky, Gray. But I'll try to do it. First of all, we are talking an excellent system. Never will be a hermetic solution in 100%. Never. It doesn't matter how many systems, how many batteries, how many layers of defense, or how many missiles. Always there will be a minimum percentage that we need to fill the gap, and then only a mix between the passive defense. It means the on-front command, learning and educate our people in Israel, run to the shelters and protect themselves. Plus the active defense. It means all the air defense architecture that we will talk about it later. Both of them together will minimize the damage, will fill the gap, will be close to the 100%, but never, not only in security and air defense, never we can say that we will provide or supply 100% hermetic solution to the state of Israel. Iron Dome, as well as the David Sling and the Arrow and all the other systems that we are operating here in Israel, all of them have basically three operating modes. We have the manual, the semi-automatic, and full automatic. I'll tell you a secret. It's not a secret, but I'll tell you that we never use the automatic mode. We are using the manual and the semi-automatic. Why? Because, and this is my philosophy about technology, advanced technology, and smart people. When you will put them together in a shift, in operational shift, in operational mission, you will achieve your goal. I will support and trust my people before the system. You will be surprised, but I'll tell you that the people, they are much more smarter than the system. The system, it's a closed formula, 1 + 1 = 2. In our life, it's not so easy. I'll give you a short example just to emphasize and have a better understanding about the meaning. Now I'm launching a rocket or missile from Gaza to the city of Ashkelon. I told you before, it's 7 miles. The flight time, it's around 15-17 seconds. In this 15-17 seconds, after 5 seconds, the system will present the GIP, the ground impact point. It's ellipse or circle, depends the distance and depends the type of the target, and they will paint that shape on the map after 5 seconds. What happened if the system will change that ellipse after 7 or 8 seconds, and then this GIP will move from open area to urbanic area? But in the system, you know that after 5 seconds, the system will freeze the situation. But the situation never freezes until hitting the ground. And then the commander, the fighter that's sitting on the van, must take the decision in the last second, even after the system recommendation, and he can make kind of a bypass to the system, enforce the system, and take the decision. In this kind of way, we are saving a lot of live people in Israel, even in the last campaign. This is just a short example.
How do they make it in only few seconds?
That's the reason why. That's the reason why they need to be very smart, very sharp, well educated. We are training a lot, making a lot of simulations. They are very focusing on the mission. They are very sharp and take a brave decisions. Nobody above them can stay between the man in the van and the mission decision. Nobody.
Amazing.
It's only this 2021 young guys, man or female, officer and warrior that's sitting on a shift.
Amazing. That's
about
it's not only
the cost,
about the cost of the missiles. It's also
about the cost. I really dislike this question because it's kind of propaganda, and we are not talking now in stories and gossips. You cannot manage the national security of the state of Israel if you will count dimes and money in every shot or every target, because it's much more than the comparison between, okay, the Qassam, it's only a few $100, and the Iron Dome missile, it's a $50,000, because it's not only these two factors in the formula. There is the direct damage and the indirect damage, the personal damage, the people confidence, the labor spend, so there's so many factors that we can put in this formula, and at the end of the day, you will find that it's not just the Iron Dome missile cost and the Qassam cost, it's much more than that. And at the end of the day, there is no question that Iron Dome operationally on the ground saved a lot of life and money to the state of Israel.
I totally agree. It's not only about the cost of the missiles, it's also the cost of the damage that would be caused if the missile, it was not there. So yeah, and I want to move on now. You know, there are many people who claims that Israel went to this operation in Gaza after 3 rockets were fired to Jerusalem, but actually, we all know in Israel that since the withdrawal from Gaza, thousands of rockets, and only if you can share with us the graph of the years, so you can see in each year how many rockets were launched from Gaza to Israel, you will be able to see that thousands of rockets were launched from Gaza to Israel, hitting various places in Israel, and of course the range was changed. This graph is updated to a day before the fighting started, so you can add the 47 of 2021 to the 4,300 that I presented at the beginning, and you can see exactly that this has been going on for years. And the idea of the Guardian of the Walls is to operationally damage what was happening, these capabilities, this aerial capability in Gaza, and of course for us this is very important. So, and I want to move on in this because Israel, as we said, invested a lot of money in Iron Dome, a lot of money in developing a very sophisticated system because of this threat that is the daily life of the people that are living in the south. But actually Israel is threatened not only from the south. Israel is threatened also from Iran, from I don't know, Syria, Yemen, and many more fronts that I didn't think of. And here maybe we can talk a little bit about it. And I think let's start from the main proxy of Hezbollah, of Iran in the region, which is Hezbollah. And since 2006, there was no war with Hezbollah, and actually no rockets were fired directly by Hezbollah itself to the northern border. And everybody's talking about mutual deterrent. And I want to ask you, what's the difference of the threat? And you mentioned that in one sentence in the beginning. What's the difference of the threat between of Hezbollah, the challenge that Hezbollah poses mainly from Lebanon today, and the threat from Gaza? Why did you say that from Hezbollah it's a greater challenge?
First of all, I think that you're more than correct. The way that you try to present the situation and the players in our region. I will say that, first of all, we need to understand and talk about Iran. It's all about Iran. Iran, it's here, it's not a phrase. Because Iran, geographically, they are 1,500 kilometers east than Israel. But they are here because the Iranians' proxies in our region, the north, Hezbollah and the Iranian militias in Syria, and Hamas in the south, and ISIS in Egypt, and others. They are Iranians head fronts in our region. Iran sponsors, educates, train, and Iran is kind of a backyard of all of these proxies. Iran making the lesson learned process between Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iranian militias in Syria, and Syria and Iran. They are managing the situation. They're fully involved in our region because it's part of Iran's vision to conquer the area, to spread the Shia revolution, and the proxies, they are the triggers to achieve Iranian vision. This is the idea about Iran, and they spend millions of millions. The Iranians economically, they are the poorest economy all over the world, but at the same time, they are sponsored in billions of dollars, the Hamas, Hezbollah, and Syria, and the Iranian militias in Syria for more than 5 years. Why? It doesn't make sense, but from the Iranian regime, it makes sense. At the same time, they are developing two ambitious programs, the nuclear program and the long-range missiles programs. Both of them running parallelly, but they are with the same target, the same goal. They each feed the other. Why they need a long-range missiles for a 5,000 kilometer, more than 3,000 miles. Israel, it's only 15 to 1,500 kilometer to 2,000 kilometer. Depends if you are in East or West Iran. But why they need a missile with a 5,000 kilometer, 3,000 miles? If each one of the participants will open the globe and the map, and they will try to imagine where is 5,000 kilometers from Iran, they will find that it will cover most of Europe, London, and even further than that. This is part of the Iranian vision to control and to challenge the modern world.
Do we know how many?
It's not only about Israel. Israel, it's not the only target and not the only enemy once we are talking about Iran. I think that's most of the Western and the modern world, US, Europe, and others, and even the Sunni world in the Arab itself, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and others, they should be afraid also from Iranian ambitions programs.
Do you know, I don't know if you know or anybody knows the numbers, other than the distances, the accuracy of these missiles? How many missiles do they have to these long ranges? What's this threat is all about from Iran?
First of all, they try, and this is, I believe, one of the main lessons learned that they took from the second Lebanon war and all the last 3-4 campaigns in Gaza that you mentioned before. And they understood, and if I put, for example, the second Lebanon war numbers here on the table, in 33 days, around 4,000 rockets, and we mentioned the numbers for the Gaza campaigns, they understood it's not enough to hit the state of Israel with thousands of rockets. It's not enough because it's a statistic threat. You mentioned before the numbers that they are eating the ground in Gaza itself. It is amazing. You know, the first 9 kids that were killed in Gaza in the first day in the last campaign, they were killed by Hamas failed missile in Gaza.
And probably more that we don't know of.
Yes, I agree. 1/3 of the missiles, they are not across the border. And then 20 to 25% eating open area of the Mediterranean Sea in Israel. This is the meaning of statistical threat. So they understood 10, 5, 3 years ago that it's not enough to fly or launch or bring a huge heads of bombs to the state of Israel. They must be more accurate. And talking about accurate missiles or rockets, they try to achieve a target of less than 10 meters.
Who is they?
Iran. Iran and all the other proxies, Iran, and in our region, Hezbollah.
Okay.
They try to reach the accuracy of less than 10 meters. What does it mean, 10 meters? That every missile has a very clear and specific address where a specific attack and hit. 10 meters, it means a specific buildings or depot or storage in a big room or a big place or space. This is the meaning. And it's much more dangerous than the statistic missile threat that I mentioned before.
Okay, but I must say that as far as what I'm reading, the IDF is saying again and again that it succeeded in destroying this project of PGM, of precision-guided missiles. So can you explain this a little bit? Do they have precision-guided missiles or not?
We try to prevent, we try to destroy, we try to delay, and we never know what we don't know. We know what we are doing, we don't know what we are doing. I think that's the assumption as a general or as a key leader in the state of Israel. The assumption must be Hezbollah and Iran today have a minority of missiles that can hit a very aggressive the state of Israel. I don't know exactly. I'm sorry that in this part of the day.
Now let's talk about the good news.
The good news.
We talk about Iron Dome.
Let's move to the good news.
Yeah. So what's about the aerial defense? When we speak about, you mentioned long-range missiles from Iran, and I want to mention also short-range artillery like mortars. Can Iron Dome answer that, or you have other technologies for that?
The reason that we build and still building the multi-tier concept in the IDF and the air defense forces as well, it's exactly dealing with this variety of threats from the lower tier up to the upper tier, from short-range mortars and rockets for a few miles and kilometers, till long-range missiles, thousands of kilometers out of the atmosphere. That's the reason why. No, I said this is the reason why we need the multi-tier concept. And here, I will talk about the multi-tier concept. I'm talking about 4 different weapon systems: Iron Dome, David Sling, Arrow 2, and Arrow 3. Those are the 4 systems that build the multi-tier concept. The way that we build the skills and capabilities, it's overlapping between the systems because we don't want to put all of our eggs in one basket. We want at least 2 options, 2 systems dealing with one threat. This is the idea. This is the strategy, the philosophy about the multi-tier concept. And once we are talking about medium and long range, it means there will be more accuracy than the other stuff. It means that we need that the Iron Dome, the David Sling, the Arrow, all of them together will deal with the medium and long range missiles. That way will promise us that we'll maximize the percentage of kill and intercept the strategic threats from Iran, Syria, or Lebanon. If we will bring two different independent solutions, Iron Dome and Arrow, Arrow and David Sling, Arrow to each one of these strategic threats, we will maximize our success dealing with these strategic threats.
So it's Iron Dome, David Sling, and Arrow 2 to
medium and Arrow 3
range.
And Arrow 3.
I'm sorry? And Arrow.
And Arrow 3.
So what's for the short range?
The short range is only the Iron Dome. So the Iron Dome is the only system that's dealing with the short range. But from the medium range, and it's a good question that you will ask me, okay, can you define the short, the medium, and the long? If you
How
will
many
ask
kilometers?
Me, yeah, that belongs to the history. That belongs to the history. In the past, we were divided the long, the medium, the short by distance. Today, it's incorrect way to look at that, because it depends if it's a threat or not, if it's a huge warhead or not, the type of the trajectory that is doing. But say without nothing, I would say that the short range, there are only the threats that we are talking today, for example, from Gaza. It will stay short range, I would say, and you can see the map here on the screen, until the metropolitan of Tel Aviv. It will stay the short range missiles or rockets. Above of that, the 45, 50 kilometers, the 30, 35 miles will stay the short. Once we're talking about the 160 or 150 kilometers, 100 miles, that will start the medium, and the long range, it's from 400 kilometers and above. So theoretically, this is the way how to divide the short, medium, and long, but it's much more complicated than only distance.
So since we probably have at least a few Americans online, I must ask you, what about the Patriot in all of that?
The air defense world are divided for two sectors. The multi-tier concept, the Iron Dome, the David Sling, the Arrow 2, the Arrow 3 belongs to the active defense. Active defense, they are all the systems that are dealing with the TBM, tactical ballistic missiles. The second sector is the ABT, the air briefing targets. It means UAVs, jets, choppers, etc. Patriot belongs to the ABTs. The idea today, all the new and the modern system, like the Iron Dome and the David Sling, they will be a dual systems. What does it mean? And we saw a first example during the last campaign. One of our Iron Dome batteries simultaneously, same time, dealing with rockets from Gaza and intercepting a UAV from Gaza. Same battery, same location, same time, doing simultaneously two different missions.
And it's all about the soldiers.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely, because on the operational shift, they are dividing a shift. 2 guys dealing with the ABT system and 3 guys dealing with the TBM. It's all from one small van shift by 5 people. But simultaneously dealing with 2 systems. What's, for example, the Patriot and Iron Dome, each one doing separately. This is the idea about the new and the modern systems today, that they have a dual simultaneously capabilities dealing with UAVs and rockets, same time, same system, same location?
I always say that the main resource of the state of Israel is the
human resource. I agree.
Not everything, all the technology, there are people behind it eventually. So just to, an interim summary, I want to talk a little bit. Omri, can you put the slide of the map, the previous map that you put of Hezbollah's ranges of rockets? This one is Hamas. And I want to say something about that because Hamas, as far as I understood, was holding about 14,000 rockets just before the current escalation, and we don't know how many exactly he had left after launching about 4,000, and probably IDF managed to target at least quite a few, and we don't know exactly how many. Hezbollah, on the other hand, is holding about 140,000 rockets in Lebanon, targeting Israel, covering almost all of Israel with various kinds of ammunition, the Grad, the Fatah 110, which are mostly those that Hezbollah is trying to make accurate of, and the Scads, which probably Hezbollah is holding no more than a few tens to few hundreds, we don't know exactly. Okay, this looks like really bad news, but is it the same bad news when we speak about the aerial threat from Yemen or from Syria, or maybe there we have a little bit of good news and the capabilities are not the same as Hamas and Hezbollah?
First of all, short comment about the two maps, because I think that they are telling us all the story about the situation in Israel. Because if I will put the two maps together in one picture, we will find that all the state of Israel covered by multi-directional threats from Gaza and from Lebanon by Hezbollah. This is the meaning. That's all the state of Israel covered by two fronts simultaneously. Because one of the assumptions that if the Hamas will start, or we will be in war with the Hezbollah, the Hamas will be part of this campaign. It will not like the last campaign that the Hamas will open any escalation or any productive situation. The Hezbollah will not join them. But once we will be in a direct escalation, fight or war with the Hezbollah, the assumption that the Hamas will join also to this scenario. And the meaning is that's not only 75% of the Israeli population, like the last campaign, under daily attack, all the state of Israel, most of them by Hezbollah, but not only. Why it's important? Because it's a very challenging situation and scenario from the Israel. And we need to keep that in our back mind about this very, very challenging situation. And you mentioned Yemen and other areas in our region. And I think that we can see in the last 2-3 years the way that Iran and the Houthis working in Yemen against Saudi Arabia. We all know the Aramco case, but not only. They are launching kind of a weekly events from Yemen to Saudi Arabia, airports, Jeddah, oil, energy assets, you name it. And who are the Houthis? They are Iranians, proxies, well-educated, well-trained, well-supported and sponsored by Iran. Yemen, Israel, they are far away from Iran and Israel. But, and for example, Egypt and Sinai, they are much closer than Saudi Arabia. But the way from Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Egypt, it's a short way. So the front end in Yemen, it means a front end in south part of Israel, same like Hezbollah and Iranian militias in Syria and Hezbollah. And if you will open the map, you see that there are two ends, north and south, and Israel in the mid.
So what? It's
this is the way that we need to understand the Houthi threat on the south from Yemen. Not a direct threat, but a potential threat for the south part of Israel, the same like Hezbollah and Iranian militias in the north part of Israel.
But it's the same amount of rockets in the hands
absolutely,
of the
absolutely. They are using Scads, they are using Fatah 110 and others, UAVs, drones. Absolutely, all the Iranian stuff in Syria, they have the same stuff in Yemen. Absolutely.
Interesting.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so just last question before we go to to the questions from the audience, and I invite everybody to write questions in the Q&A here. Actually, Israel is the most threatened state when we speak about artillery and everything we just discussed, and that's why we developed these sophisticated capabilities of defense systems. I want to ask you a little bit, to touch that just a little bit, other aspects of challenge when we speak about these rockets targeting Israel, because people around the world, what people saw in the past few weeks is that 10 Israelis were killed, or 13 Israelis were killed in Israel. Iron Dome was highly successful, and about 200 civilians, we don't know the exact numbers, it will take time until we'll know, were killed in Gaza. What do people don't know about the damage in Israel, other than the casualties?
You mentioned the numbers, and as I told you before, it's not telling a story or just telling numbers, because behind the numbers standing families, standing neighborhoods, standing people in Israel. And if anyone from the participants and others can bring me a similar example, like the state of Israel, that 75% of the people living under direct, immediate attack, and the kids in the schools, elementary schools and kindergartens, participants in evacuate exercises to evacuate themselves to shelters, I will agree with him. No other state than Israel dealing with this kind of threat from south, north, and east. No one, people, leaders, will agree to live and raise his kids in this kind of situation. This is the reason why the state of Israel spent billions of dollars to build these efficient and effective capabilities to protect the state of Israel, the Israeli people, and the state of Israel assets and facilities. This is the only way. This is the only way. Almost 25% of the Israeli budget, talking about national security, almost 25% for the overall, not directly to the MOD, Minister of Defense. As I put overall, all the budget, almost 25%, 1/4 of the yearly annual budget going to the security, pure security, the state of Israel.
Okay, I want to move on to questions.
Okay.
The first question is, what is the role of Quds Force in the current rocket capabilities of Hamas? You mentioned Iran many times. Is it Quds Force? Is it Quds Force?
Quds Force, they are the special forces of Iran, that they are responsible for the Middle East area out of Iran. So they are the special forces. They are working directly to the Iranian Ayatollah regime, and they are responsible for the Middle East.
Okay, there is another question here, and I must tell you that I was asked this question in this or that phrase many times in the past. I will quote the same way it was written here. At what point and under what circumstances would Israel need to take an offensive, vis-a-vis defensive approach to all this? And I would add, many people asked me, why don't you go to preemptive attack? How come you keep calm when you have this kind of threat of thousands of rockets all around you? And actually, you are only responsive.
First of all, it's always a combination between offensive and defensive capabilities. You never can build your national security only on the defense pillar. You always need these two strong ends. Only strong defense pillar and capabilities can promise and support your offensive capabilities. It's give you the option to use the offensive and then contain any attack. Secondly, you mentioned before the Hezbollah in Iran, big ambitious program to accurate the missiles. And it's not a secret. We are not telling all the truth. We try to, but Israel working and acting very often in the northern part of Israel, mainly in Syria, but not only, to prevent, to delay, to destroy. Never in 100% success, but we try to minimize the leakers of this stuff. It could be GPSs, it could be parts or kits of missiles. It doesn't matter if it's in Damascus International Airport or it's in T4 or other places in Syria. This is pure attack, preemptive events and activities. This is the yeah.
Okay, so I agree, and I want to ask another question. No, you know what? I want to say one sentence about what you said. I think what you're saying is actually you are talking about the Mabam. You're talking about the campaign between wars, which Israel had taken about 1,000 attacks in the past decade or so, maybe more, I don't know, in the region, mainly in Syria. And we're doing what we can about that, but I want to make life a little bit more difficult for you. 140,000 rockets in Lebanon. And again, this is a question that I was asked many times. Why aren't we going to offensive campaign in Lebanon?
Look, we cannot be the sheriff in the neighborhood and start wars every day or every year. Okay, the main target or the main goal of our government, it doesn't matter which side of which party of the government, is to delay the wars, to keep the life in the state of Israel as normal as we can, until we are crossing the red line. Where is the red line? It's very flex. It's very flex because, and you mentioned Lebanon. Since 2006, the second Lebanon war, I think that we fully deter Nasrallah and Hezbollah. It wasn't the situation a day after the second Lebanon war, but today, 15 years after, we can say that deterrence is not fighting every year or every single of reason attack Hezbollah or Iran. Hopefully that will be the situation in Gaza. In that way, we will keep ourselves as a state the option to find, define, and decide about the time, about the reason, about the location. Because in our region, all the players, states and non-government organizations, they are now excellent. The IDF and the Israeli state capabilities and skills. You mentioned the 1,000 strikes during the last decade. We can see the last campaign in Gaza. All the other players, they are sitting on the fence and they are watching and they are learning exactly what Nasrallah learned 15 years ago. So the Dahia effect, that was the tall building in Beirut, same like the buildings in Gaza, all our neighbors and all the region watching the same effect. So you don't need to fight every year, every
day,
week, or every event, a war to say, okay, we are here.
So no doubt one of the main principles in Israel's security strategy is the deterrent. If you create effective deterrent.
That was the first goal that the Minister of Defense Gantz declared as the last campaign. And why? Because this is the key point once we are talking about region. Deterrence, what does it mean, deterrence? They will keep the thousands of rockets and missiles. The deterrence walking about the willing, about the decision. That's when we will work, they will not use that stuff. If the deterrence will fail, they will use that stuff. So it's not just counting how many missiles. They have thousands. But if they will not use it, it means that we are deterring our neighbors.
Well, I hope they won't. I want to ask one last question. We talked a lot about the missiles. Can you say a little bit more about the UAVs? You told me just before we started that during your time as the commander of the aerial defense in Israel, 2015 to 2018, you were responsible for the interception of 5 or 6 UAVs that came.
5 UAVs and 1 MiG-23.
And 1 MiG-23.
Syrian MiG-23, yeah.
It came from Syria. So what's the risk with these UAVs? What can they cause?
First of all, I cannot see any difference between accurate missile and UAV. Okay, I'm not talking about the simple UAVs from the Hamas. The payload of 5-6 kilos, you cannot compare with 90 or 100 kilo of the Fajr 5 or 7. But talking about accurate threat, the UAV, it's exactly like that. You can put a GPS of a target and send the UAV low target, low altitude, altitude, high velocity, and bring a huge stuff of a bomb to a specific target. So the UAV, from my perspective, it's exactly like SCAD-D, accurate to specific or strategic asset in Israel. This is the way that we are watching this trend or this threat. And I think that's the way that we need to deal with UAVs. It's the same way that we are dealing with accurate TBM, tactical ballistic missiles.
And it's the same amount of explosive if you compare?
It depends. And once we're talking about UAVs, the difference, for example, between UAV and cruise missiles, almost zero difference. The cruise missile much more faster than the UAV, much more heavy than the UAV, but they are the same category. So the smart and advanced UAVs, they are like the cruise missiles, the same category, the same type or the same family of threats. Again, go back to Aramco and look what happened with a little bit more than dozen cruise missiles from Iran to Aramco facilities in Saudi Arabia. This is the scenario. This is the scenario. So it doesn't matter if it's an accurate Scud-D or Fatah 110 or cruise missile or sophisticated or advanced UAV. They are on the same category of threats once I'm talking about the strategic threat, the state of Israel.
Okay, that's highly interesting because, you know, I must tell you that from Alma Center here, each time we've seen a penetration of a UAV from Syria, and definitely during the current conflict that we had one penetration from this area, we ask ourselves, did it carry explosive? Was this an attacking UAV, or for intelligence, what was that all about?
You always know what you know, and you don't know what you know until you will feel if it's with or without explosives.
Okay, now I get you. Okay. We're not
it might be too late.
Exactly. Okay, so just to wrap things up, we try to dive in today to a very, I think, fascinating topic and important topic in a very short time. Every Israeli knows where the shelter is, how much time we have to run for shelter. Many Israelis in the southern part of Israel are living in the past 20 years under the constant threat of missiles and alerts and sirens 24/7. And for us, it was really important today to tell our side of the story. It's not the whole story. It's a small part of the story, but it's a small part that should be heard about what we are dealing with and what we are doing in order to defend our civilians. Zvika, thank you very much for being with us today. I think you shed a light. Even for me, I learned a lot about how we do that and what's really the threat is.
And what we need to do. And what we need to do.
And what we need to do, of course. If you love what we're doing, I invite you all to donate to Alma. It's extremely helpful. I must say, to be honest with you, in the past year of COVID, that we hardly had groups only on Zoom, we focused on the research and we published some very interesting reports, thanks to your support, reports that I think made Nasrallah, everybody says he's sick. So maybe Alma had a small part in this. We've seen retaliation and responses from Hezbollah to our researchers, and including some threats we got from Hezbollah, so we're probably doing something right. We are also, of course, extremely be honored and grateful if you can share our reports, and if you like our programs, you're invited to organize a group. Now you don't need to travel, and you actually can't travel to Israel, but you can definitely meet us on Zoom. All our educational programs, including the simulation, are available online. So we would be happy to meet you for a private session. Thank you very much, everybody, for being with us today. I hope to see you soon in Israel when it's peaceful and healthy. We'll meet next month. We're going to have a webinar about the nuclear issue of Iran, the JCPOA. So I hope to see you there as well. Thank you very much.